Transcultural psychiatry. It is crucial than ever in these times of war, human disasters, and nature disasters like earthquakes. So to start, I want to position myself formally in this presentation as a psychiatrist working at an institution, Parnassia Group and Leiden University, and chairing the Department of Transcultural Psychiatry, which aims to improve the quality and availability of mental health care services for the underserved populations, and that they receive treatments and culturally relevant and sensitive care to their needs and histories. Bir sonraki slide'a böyle geçiyorum. I would like to introduce you to my department. This is the Department of Transcultural Psychiatry in the Dutch Psychiatry Association. One of our members are here, Fatma. Those are my colleagues, they are psychiatrists. And we give attention to cultural sensitivity in psychiatry, immigration policy, and multicultural society in general. For example, a mother whose child is using cannabis, very afraid to mention it to the Dutch authorities because she's afraid that her child is going to be taken away from her. Or we have much more examples, I will come to that. Last but not least, while recent racism and violence take over the world and health disparities, our department is a big voice in the Netherlands and in the world at this point. What is our content today? I will briefly talk about why we do what we do, how many of us made the choice to be here, to become the healthcare professionals who has interest in human suffering, the definitions, ethnicity, culture, transcultural psychiatry, migration and cultural diversity. Why is this important actually, and how culture affects our behavior? And then I will finish with a takeaway message home. So each of us are representative of our cultures and experiences. In our work, we psychiatrists are our own tools. It's important to acknowledge our backgrounds and stay close to our core values while extending to the other. In that sense, I would like to tell you guys why I chose to talk about transcultural psychiatry. Because actually my training was genetics, biological psychiatry in the first hand. I could have today talked you about the genetics of autism or ADHD. But my path, my journey to become a transcultural psychiatrist made me come here today and talk about transcultural psychiatry. It was not because I worked voluntarily in India, right up corner, left up corner is Kenya, left down is Gambia, right down is Cuba. It was not that, but it was this. Do you guys have any idea what this is? Fatma knows. It's a map of Netherlands. And the pink line is Bible Belt. İncil kemeri deniyor. İncil Hristiyanlığın yaygın olduğu alan Hollanda'daki. Yeah, Bible Belt. So what happens in Bible Belt? I was a Turkish doctor. I went to the Netherlands because I wanted to study genetics. And I did. I got my PhD. And then they said, okay, now you can also start to do your residency here in the Netherlands to become a psychiatrist. I said, yeah, thank you. It's an honor to have a place. After a while, I had to stop because they said, oh, well, you have a Turkish diploma. Even though you have a PhD, you need to do all over the medical school. In one hand, I was an assistant professor, yani doçent bir taraftan. And on the other hand, I had to be the co-assistant, yani intern. That brought me this question of injustice and inequality. First time, I realized within the Europe, there is something that I was facing. I was the other. And first year, I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm a doctor from Turkey. But yeah, I humbled myself eventually, and I did that, luckily, so that I can be here and talk about my experience. And then my residency I did in the Bible Belt. So I will take you guys to a journey of some of my patients who made me start to think why I want to do transcultural psychiatry. One of my first patients was a gypsy girl. She was a Dutch gypsy girl, 28 years old, has never been to a doctor in her life. This is Netherlands, huh? She has never been to a dentist. Her mouth deceived teeth. She has been raped by her multiple relatives, which are in jail, having anxiety, panic attack. So it was a culture shock to me in my country, which I haven't very much faced with. And I thought maybe language barrier can be a problem to treat her. But after a while, language barrier was gone. And then I started to think, what is culture actually? How you can extend to the other without even talking their own language properly. And my second patient, it was in a hospital psychiatry department. It was an Eritrean Islamic woman. She was 6 months pregnant during the war. She was raped by her own doer. And she was telling us that she needs to get an abortion, otherwise she will be killed by her parents and her husband in Ethiopia. She had to go through a Christian evaluation, whereas this person was an Islamic patient. A priest had to decide for her and console her. I'm not against the system of it, but it was not culturally sensitive to her needs. She was not felt understood or valued. This is my last example of why transcultural psychiatry, why working with this patient group. It was a Turkish patient, çok tatlı bir teyze. She was into all types of antidepressants, antipsychotic medication, no response. Married with 2 kids, crying in the room all the time. She came to me as a second opinion because of the language. I talked with her, and after a while she confessed that her problem was actually her son, who was using cannabis, 15 years old. In Holland, it is a little bit the culture. Maybe you guys heard about it. But she was so afraid, because what happens sometimes in Holland, maybe it's a myth, our Turkish population is very afraid if their son or child use drugs, they can be taken away from them and given to other families. So she was afraid to disclose it at that time. In the end, I invited her with her son to the room. I'm a very unorthodox psychiatrist, and I gave system therapy, family therapy, and she dropped the medications, and the son went to university in the end after the follow-up. Because that was the Dutch culture, and we had to normalize and lift her worries about her son. That made me come to the area of, after studying genetics, realizing a person is not only made of biology, environment, and psychology, but also the culture. So what is culture? It is shared, learned behavior and meanings that are socially transferred in various life activity settings for purposes of individual and collective adjustment and adaptation. Culture can be transitory, situational for a few minutes. Here we are forming a culture together. It is relatively enduring, ethnocultural lifestyles, for example. But in all instances, culture is dynamic. It changes and modifies. It can be internally, like values, our beliefs, our attitudes, orientations, consciousness levels, perceptions, expectations, and personhood. It can be external, roles, institutions, social structures. In any case, it shapes and constructs our realities. They contribute to our worldviews and perceptions. Maybe you guys also heard about marginalized populations in that sense. Who are these marginalized populations? They are groups and communities that experience discrimination and exclusion. It can be social, political, and economic because of the unequal power relationships across this economic, social, political, and cultural dimensions. And if you want to define the minority's status, its members systematically experience lesser income, so poverty, authority, and power than other members of the society. But be careful, because a minority group is not necessarily a smaller population than other groups. For example, think about 1% ruling the world. Who is the minority? When I talk about transcultural psychiatry in medical school in Netherlands, I ask these questions to my students. I ask them if they have ever been subject to a negative reaction based only their membership in a group. Maybe some of you know about Leiden University, but it is a very white university. The answer rarely comes yes. But if I tell this lesson in another cultural setting of our population, like Turkish population, all hands are up almost, that they are being subjected to a negative reaction. And the second question, when I ask it to the Leiden University, it's positive, yes, because they are in a tennis club maybe, or a ski club, which my population of patients are not aware of. I will touch and base a little bit about the history of psychiatry and why transcultural psychiatry became a part of maturity out of that. So psychiatry arose in the post-Enlightenment of Europe about 200, 300 years ago from two main sources. First, there was a need to control and put away the so-called lunatics who were disturbing the social order. And the second was a growing interest in matters to do with the European medical criteria of looking into mind. What is mind? These two came together and started psychiatry research. And when you look at the comparative psychiatry, that had to do asking questions about the universality of the major disorders. For example, is depression same everywhere? And that happened after Kraepelin, after colonization. Kraepelin visited one of the Indonesian islands, and he started to ask, is the OCD or depression the same in Germany as it is in Indonesia? Those are, as far as we know, one of the first questions that came up. And in general, non-Western, Eastern traditions of mental health, as compared to the Western that underpins much of psychiatry and Western psychiatry, emphasize balance, harmony, stability of the outer world of relationships. And the biggest difference may well center on individualism. And this may well be a source of difficulty in counseling. For instance, in counseling, people in a multicultural society, other esteem, like respect to the other people, may be more important than self-esteem for a meaningful and in a multicultural society. We live this in Europe very much. As an example, there is this sharp distinction between the Eastern way of looking at it and Western way of looking at it. For example, with the first migration, ilk işçiler, Almanya ve Hollanda'ya giden, with them we saw that there is a rooted Easternized belief which they don't want to lose. And then their kids struggle between these two cultures. So what does transcultural psychiatry do then? It deals with the description, definition, assessment, management of all psychiatric conditions. They reflect and subjected to the influence of cultural factors in the psychosocial context, while using the concepts and instruments from social and biological sciences, to the advantage of a full understanding of psychopathology and its treatment. So in transcultural psychiatry, there are just 2 points of view. Culture and psychopathology are inseparable. Abnormal behaviors can only be understood with the cultural context in which they occur. It's called cultural relativism. And the other view is that basic psychological disorders are present in all cultures. It's a universal way of looking at it. And transcultural psychiatry bridges between these two. So why is it really important, actually? What does culture, those issues, matter in mental health? For that, we need to understand why culture matters. Culture is relevant to psychiatry. Scientifically, because we ask, oh, sorry, guys. We ask this question, how culture influences the brain and behavior. Social issues, who are belonging to some certain racial communities, for example, they have a significant disadvantage in healthcare system. For example, this gypsy patient of mine, she couldn't go to a doctor for 28 years. And there are many more migrant groups that are having it so difficult to enter the medical healthcare system in the Netherlands to this day. I'm very curious actually in Turkey how it works, and I would really love to hear from you about it. There are ethical issues. We as clinicians may have an idea of what is healthy for the patient, but it might not be in the belief system of the patient. For example, vaccinations. It's a human rights issue, recognizing and respecting the difference. Culture is essential to us, like water, like air. No human being can be without culture. And the question is, do all human beings have an access to the culture? There are political issues. The fact of globe is diverse. How are we going to exist together in this diverse earth together? And for us as clinicians, this is very important because those are all stressor factors for our patients, and we can be the bridge, we can do the bridging between the cultures and help to ease the stress of our patient. And then there is the war. This is a recent given about the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, 2023. It is indicating that 110 million people are forcibly displaced all over the world. It's a huge number, and 62.5 are internally displaced. 36.4 million are refugees. Those are humans, not only the numbers. And within them, there are children. There are 43.3 million children forcibly displaced. Around 2 million are born out of this condition. And before their journey starts, their journey is correlated with their parents' journey. What happens in that state of migration framework? Migration is in 3 frameworks. There is the pre-migration and departure. There is a transit period. There is resettlement. Pre-migration and departure can be social, political, and economical factors. Separation from family and friends, decisions regarding who comes, who leaves, act of a familiar environment, life-threatening circumstances, experience of violence, of loss, and significant others. In the transit period, they also go through a lot. There can be refugee camps, detention centers, waiting for a paper, immediate and final location, and loss of the significant others. Finally, when they resettle in their countries, there are cultural issues. There's reception from the host country, opportunity to structure, and their expectations and reality. I have patients coming from Turkey, and some of them are saying like they were much happier in Turkey, actually, than living as a refugee in the Netherlands. And this degree of accumulative stress through migration process is one of the other factors. This is, in Holland, a recent study. Holland is 17.5 million people living in the Netherlands. 4.4 million are people from migration background. Non-Westerns are 2.5 million. Majority are the Turkish people. followed by the Faslılar, Moroccans. I don't know if you also hear from your patients those kind of myths about immigrants. They are taking out of our country away. They're uneducated. They're stealing our jobs. They're uncultured. They are not to be trusted. So not only they have to leave their countries, but they also have to face all these myths and prejudgments. We as clinicians, what are the considerations in our clinical practice? We know from the studies that there is a huge disparity, indicate that immigrants and ethnic minorities are subject to disparities, access to care and prognosis. Growing evidence indicates that there is a racial discrimination. There's institutional discrimination in Europe. It looks like the people who need it cannot access it, still to this day. What must the clinician know to diagnose the patient and to treat it? Language. We touch on base about that. Language is very important, but you don't need to talk the language of the patient. There are more cues that a person can be culturally sensitive, reach out to the patient. The same goes with the religion, understanding of it, traditions, beliefs, ethics, ethnics, gender orientation. There are cultural, social aspects, the concept of the problem, the meaning and context of the patient, idioms of stress, and notions of ethnopharmacology. There are factors that complicate differential diagnosis. It's the diagnostic system in the West. With the DSM classification, I don't know if you also have difficulties with DSM classification, but we really, in the West, have a big difficulty there to diagnose our patients that are coming from Africa or other backgrounds. There are idioms of distress, and there are explanatory models. What are idioms of distress? For example, grandma's saying that my nerves are bothering me, or the neighbor is talking about a depression, or the friend talking about burnout. In some cultures, burning the dinner means that you are pissed off with your husband. There are somatization and bodily idioms of stress. The question is, can an item also be a symptom? Can there be bodily gestures of distress? Transcultural psychiatry deals with these questions. What are the current status of the immigrants? We see that there's an underutilization of services. There's a high levels of discontinuity, poor adherence, poor results, misdiagnosis, and inadequate treatment. Bear with me because it seems like I'm giving the negative messages, but there are also lots of good things happening. However, those are the situations we come with the immigrants. I would like to give a few examples. Stigma is a big barrier. I have sometimes Turkish patients who doesn't want to sit in the waiting room because a neighbor can see them waiting for the psychiatrist. One of them even told to the other people that he's a cleaner in our hospital, so that he doesn't want to be seen that he is there for the treatment. There's a relay on family support. For example, they take their little children to make the translation, which is very harming to the child, to have to translate for the parents about their personal life to the doctor. There are concerns of the side effects of medication, there are geographical difficulties, and under-detection in the primary care. So what are we trying to achieve? We are trying to achieve and give cultural sensitive care by listening and speaking skills, interpretation of the cultural codes. We are really teaching about how to respect the patients in the West, awareness of the presence of prejudice. I had some patients' second opinion coming to me. One of them came because they thought he was autistic, but he was a very religious man and he didn't want to look at the face of the doctor. And another patient came with a bipolar diagnosis because he spent €50,000 for his son's wedding. Yani bizde düğüne harcanır o kadar ama in the West it's not very common. That's why they thought that he has bipolar disorder. So this is this kind of second opinion we are doing in transcultural psychiatry. And the psychodynamics part, I think Hocam will tell more about the psychotherapy about that. So as a researcher, we are also looking at the impact of culture in these major psychiatric disorders. In Holland, they found out that schizophrenia is more relevant in the Moroccan patients. There's only one study, which is done by a white Dutch colleague. And now there are more clinicians coming, and they don't agree with that. So we are looking into that if it is correct. And the rest of the studies we are also running. Those are a few publications of my team in the last few years. You could find in PubMed. One is about diversity in the male-female ratio in Dutch academic psychiatry. I think it's very interesting because in the West, in Holland, still we see that more, there's the glass ceiling. As a woman, you come to a certain level, associate professor, and if you want to go higher, it's almost like impossible because there's some like other guys waiting there, and it's almost impossible to get there. So this article is about that. And the other is about cultural diversity in the mental health care, diversity and psychiatry. And a recent one is very interesting. It's about the online group psychotherapy about self-acceptance in reducing shame among transgender migrants. It was a very interesting group that I gave the therapy in Turkish language from Syria, Turkey, and all parts of Turkey. I will very shortly, hocam vaktimiz var mı? Bir iki dakika daha. Genetics part of it, because it's impossible not to mention pharmacogenetics. It's an increasing interaction between the exposure between the Western-based pharmaceuticals and non-Western patients. We know that our DNA affects our response to the drugs. Some are safe and effective, the other are not. The other are unsafe and also not effective. We know that many antidepressants and antipsychotics are toned by the CYP2DC enzyme. While this is happening, we have also this meta-analysis estimating worldwide variation of CYP2D6 and C19. Between all these countries, such a variation. There are super extensive metabolizers, Ethiopians, Saudi Arabians, Spaniards. Not only genes, even diets, dietary habits differ across ethnic groups, which alters the pharmacokinetic properties of the drugs. Like grapefruit juice, for example, looks very innocent, but it alters. And diet rich in cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts. As the software of the cultural context of the medical doctor also affects the medication. It seems like, for example, blacks more likely to be prescribed conventional antipsychotics. I recommend if you want to read this article about ethnicity and psychopharmacology, it tells a lot about the bias about the medication and the antipsychotics. So culture is our software. Biology is our hardware. Cultural interpretation of Western medicine, CFI we use, and then ethnicity and race are biased concepts. It seems like we are going to a personalized medicine genotyping when a mixture of this understanding of the culture with it. My takeaway messages is privilege is blinding. In reality, it seems like those are the chances of the people. And equality is not enough, actually. We need to create more equity. And maybe even one step further, we need to help to take the barrier out to help the liberation of our patients, our loved ones, and the people around us. In the wheel of power and privilege, how to use this power and privilege to understand that true collaboration versus tokenization, avoiding the tokenization, for example, going beyond simply inviting someone just because she or he checks the boxes to create a demographic diversity, but to look really the meaning of a person who will bring the content. And lastly, cultural humility, acknowledging that we are all bound by our limitations and are often ignorant of our own. Thank you very much for your attention.